Mary redeemed a $50,000 cash prize playing Chumba Casino this year.
I was only playing for fun, so winning this was a dream come true.
Chumba Casino is America's #1 social casino experience. It's serious fun. With over 80 casino-style games to choose from, you too could win life-changing amounts of cash. Be like Mary. Log on to ChumbaCasino.com and give them a whirl. That's ChumbaCasino.com. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18 plus. Terms and conditions apply. See website for details. The voice in the preceding commercial was not the actual voice of a winner.
Welcome to JessicaLazelleCannon.com. I am your host today, Scott Cannon, co-owner of Cannon Light Media. I'll be producing today's podcast. With me today is Jessica Cannon of JessicaLazelleCannon.com, author of the forthcoming book, Proactive Caregiving, A Guide to Becoming a Healthier Caregiver. So Jessica, can you tell us a little bit about who you are, where you're from, what brought you to this book, how it came to be? I know it's a lot to kind of take in for the first question, so let's start with the first one. Where are you from? Where were you born?
Right. I was actually born in New York.
New York, city girl.
Yes, and still am. But born in New York, and I was only there for 2 very short years before my father moved us to Texas.
Which part?
We started in San Antonio, Texas for the first couple of years, I think about 5 or 6 years, and then he transitioned into Austin, Texas, where we've been ever since.
Well, that's a great city.
It is.
So so you grew up in Austin for the most part.
Right.
About schools, where did you go to school?
I went to schools in South Austin. I graduated from Crockett High School, and then I turned around into college from there on out and went to Concordia University and then Park University.
Well, what did you study?
Well, I started out with business management, although by the time I finished my first degree, my passion towards analytical data started to kick in, and so I went the accounting route and got my second degree.
In accounting?
In accounting, yes.
And a CPA shortly after, I assume?
Shortly thereafter, because you can only go so far before you hit a plateau, and my hunger for growing knowledge was just there.
So it sounds like at this point you're a working CPA in accounting.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm not tracking we're talking about proactive caregiving here. How do we go from being a CPA to proactive caregiving? Where's the connection there?
Right. So while I was going to school and raising a family, Mom was also still working, and she was a teacher, a junior high teacher. And between their family, our family, her life started to take a turn. And we never really paid close enough attention because when you're living life, trying to balance everything, right. Everybody's about me.
When you were kids, too.
We were kids, and so some of the odd things that were happening were just odd. It wasn't until we were all older, and I say all, my siblings, I'm a middle child, I have an older sister and a younger sister. It wasn't until we were older adults that some of the odd things growing up started to seem bizarre.
Well, the 80s were pretty bizarre.
Yes, but it goes beyond that. This is something that the dots then were nowhere close to being connected. Mm-hmm. And the things that were happening, the behaviors, the medical issues, just everything seemed at the time random issues. And so I was trying to work and grow a career and go in a certain direction. But as life happened, and as what we weren't aware of then, the dementia was already taking a toll on Mom, which created a situation that their marriage after 37 years ended in divorce. And Mom started to gradually need more and more care. And so at some point I had to step away from my career to become her full-time caregiver.
Right. So you shifted from a lifetime of education as an accountant, getting that CPA. And I think I think it's fair to say that most people, even without accounting knowledge, understand that a CPA license is a very difficult thing to obtain. I think that's pretty common knowledge. So I can only imagine the struggle of stepping away from that, of transitioning from a working CPA to having to step away to take care of your mother. What was that like for you? I'm
Absolutely.
sure, I mean, emotionally, I'm sure it was just, but can you describe that for us?
It was a very emotional change for me because it was what I had identified with for well over 10 years.
Right.
I mean, by the time I was stepping away, I had been an accountant for 18 years. Not necessarily a licensed CPA for as long, but I had already been an accountant for 18 years. That was where my identity lived. That's who I was. It wasn't just what I did. It was who I was. It was my thought process. It was everything.
Yeah. The first question people ask you when they meet you is, what do you do?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so stepping away from that, it caused me to come to this caregiving journey to be very angry.
Yeah.
I came to it kicking and screaming, I guess you could say, because I tried to find the ways to work from home, work remotely, part-time, or, where I was able to fill in the blanks, but the demand was higher than what I could do on a part-time basis. Right. And so after going to college for 10 years and taking another 2 years for a license, stepping away was disappointing.
Yeah. Well, like I say, I can only imagine that transition. So we grew up in Texas. We've gone to school for decades. We've attained that license, that CPA license, and then we've had to step away from it to become a caregiver. Where does the book come into that? How did the book come to be? I mean,
right.
By your own admission, it's a difficult transition. There's a lot of anger and resentment to it. How do we get from that to this book, Proactive Caregiving?
Well, just before I stepped away from the corporate world, I started to receive some spiritual guidance, and I fought it in the beginning because the guidance was to let go and to step into a more spiritual career. And in my mind, spiritual career meant, I don't know, working for a church or coming from a very strict faith-filled family. That meant a lot more sacrifice than I was actually ready for. And so when I actually tried to do the whole soul searching, what do I do next? Because caregiving, I knew what was, at that time, I knew what it was going to require of me, but it didn't seem like it was going to be enough. So I went back to my whole childhood roots and what was I passionate about. And for me, writing was what saved me going through my adolescent years. And so stepping away from the corporate world, the first thing I did was create a blog.
Okay.
And so the blogs were my cathartic written therapy to
get it off your chest, pour it all out.
Get through all of this and try to understand what in the world is happening to Mom, what is happening to me. Why are our worlds colliding in this way?
Right.
So we had the typical family drama, and stepping into Mom's world was hard to do, but in order to do it, I had to commit to it. And so over a period of time, stepping into her world, I started to see how she came to be this way. The toll of the years of poor habits, the toll of avoidance of dealing with her own health, and where this came to be. And so bit by bit, the chapters of the book just started to
materialize. So I'm taking, what I'm hearing is, in learning when she got this diagnosis, it sounds like you did a lot of research.
Yes, I had to.
Diving into who, the what, where, how, and all that.
Well, if you're someone or have a loved one that's dealing with cancer, you're rushed right away into immediate responses because it's most likely going to entail surgery, chemo, radiation, right, that kind of thing. But when you get the diagnosis of, and quite honestly, in the beginning, you don't really get a diagnosis. because there's so many different types of dementia, that it's a process. And sometimes it takes the doctors several months before they can come to any kind of understanding, because the definitive diagnosis is at death when they can do an actual autopsy on the brain. So this is where the research, and again, my background with the education and school, this is where I turned for my own peace of mind. And so research was, I guess, the student in me trying to figure it out.
So I understand. And it sounds like, too, once you do that, as you alluded to earlier, you can see that even though they may not be able to definitively diagnose it until after death, the early warning signs are there.
Right.
Well, in your early 20s, 30s, possibly, in some cases.
Right. And that's where this book has grown to be a very important piece, because people of my age group and younger need to know this information, because a lot of society now assumes that they don't have to worry about this. This is not something that they need to deal with until they're much later. Yeah, it's just old people, 65 and older. I don't have to worry about it. But that is not the case.
So proactive,
Yes.
to me says there's something I can do to preemptively prevent possibly this from happening. What is an example of someone in our age generation that can proactively do to prevent or slow down or minimize the possibility of this disease?
Well, this goes, and that's a good question, because this goes further back. When I was trying to find that starting point, how far back do you go? How young can someone be and actually start? And that's when I started realizing the proactive part of this, it actually begins with the child. And so therefore the child, in order to get their educational route going, then we have to reach the parents, because this disease, and for what I'm learning and what I've researched, dementia is no longer a disease to be considered merely genetic. When we have families and they say, the first thing the doctors ask is, are you genetically, what is your history? You know, they're trying to figure out if you're genetically predisposed. If you had a great-grandfather, a grandfather, and a father, and they all had this similar diseases, maybe not the same variation, but they all had them, so you assume it's going to be you. That's an incorrect assumption to make.
Really?
It is, because it's environmental, it's cultural. If you lived the same way your father and your grandfather lived, and you adapted and learned their same habits, then you're setting yourself up for the same outcome.
So if I grew up in the South eating nothing but fried foods, my health is not going to be conducive to...
The first thing that comes to mind with that scenario is if your family, and very similar to my mother, a family of 10 siblings, and they all have defibrillators.
Oh, wow.
So when you have poor habits, you're going to expect to have a bad heart. And when you have a bad heart, your brain is going to suffer.
Yeah.
It's all environmental, cultural. So one of the things we can do now is we start to teach our children better habits.
What kind of habits?
Well, this is where we go into lifestyle issues, or habits, as we were saying.
Diet, exercise,
sleep, meditation. Yes. The four wheels of a vehicle to a better life.
Oh, I like
to a
that.
Proactive life. You can't drive a car on 3 wheels. So why would you live your life and expect to avoid the outcome?
Right. So it sounds like diet can be a big part of this then.
It
potentially.
Is. I can't even put a percentage to it at this point, but it is a large piece of this. When you watch TV and you see all the commercials and the marketing and everything that tells you you need this, and it's something, the most recent one that actually infuriated me was a certain soda suggesting a diet drink for a breakfast meal.
Yeah, breakfast soda. Yeah, that was. I saw that commercial.
And trying to, everything now, this movement of women in power, and trying to suggest to this woman of business and in power that she needed this diet soda in order to begin her day and put that strong foot forward. And that's our culture. We're doing it to ourselves.
Yeah. The amount of sugar in that alone, I'm sure, is
right.
Unhealthy.
Our body can't regenerate, or the cells can't regenerate when we have excess sugar to break everything down.
Yeah. So it sounds like there are a lot of tips like that in this book about diet
Yes.
and health, sleep. What about financially speaking? Is there anything that people need to know of to proactively prepare for this kind of event in their life?
So now you're talking about my area.
Yeah. So
stepping away from accounting, and that's where I came to this as a proactive, because in accounting, everything is, I say everything. A lot of accounting is based off of historical data. So you're in reactive mode. And unless you get into the trending and forecasting, then you're not able to see that proactive approach in business.
Right.
So when I stepped into Mom's World and that mindset, that was the only way I knew how to look at this. Mm-hmm. How do we stop looking at the reactive issues at hand and start looking at proactive ways? Because honestly, stepping into her world, yes, I was angry, but once I started to get further into her world, it scared me. It made me panic that this was going to be me someday.
Yeah.
So I personally want to proactively prevent going in this direction.
Right.
This will not be my story.
Well, and if there are things that you can do and that we can all do to break that cycle of dementia, then yeah, it sounds like very important information to get out there. So who is this book for? Is there an age group that this is for? I mean, because when people hear Alzheimer's and dementia, we immediately think of grandma and grandpa, right?
Right.
80, 90-year-old people. But from what we're learning more and more, it sounds like it can affect people in their 50s and 60s. So,
and 40s.
And
30s and 40s.
30s and 40s even. So they're really, in this book, it sounds like really is for everybody, all age ranges.
And that's why I decided that this needs to go back towards the starting point, which is our children. Mm-hmm. And that means it's our parents of many ages. Whether you're in your 20s, your 30s, or your 40s, your habits that you are instilling into your children are creating this.
Wow.
Plain and simple.
Yeah.
And just as you said, a lot of people assume that this is grandma and grandpa. No, this is mom and dad.
Yeah.
This started to happen to my mother at the age of her early 40s. She had her first defibrillator placed by the time she was 55. So she started off with vascular dementia, which became early onset Alzheimer's, which also later became frontal temporal dementia. Mm-hmm. And that in itself, understanding how this happens, there is a roadmap that shows you. There was a starting point that she had early enough time in life to correct. But when you stay in those poor habits, you're on a course that's going one direction.
Well, so I understand that the book is still in progress, but when are you targeting for it to be available?
The goal is to have it completed and available for the public by fall of 2019.
So
it is in second draft right now, and the editorial process is just now getting started.
And how can people find out more about the book and its availability and updates on all of that?
Well, they can go to jessicalazellcannon.com and subscribe there, so that as new material, whether it be blogs or vlogs and updates towards the book come out, they'll be the first to know.
Awesome. And so this podcast, this is of course the first one we're doing this to find out more about you. How does this podcast on a larger scale going forward tie into the website and the book?
Right. The book is going to be a guidebook that covers multiple areas, from the preliminary symptoms, the diagnosis, the legal pieces, the financial pieces, preventative measures. That's one area. But the podcast is more so the day-to-days.
Okay.
So that other caregivers, And it's not just dementia. When you look at this, there are parents who care for special needs children, autism, for example. That is very taxing on our bodies, and we don't realize it. And so the day-to-day of becoming that better caregiver, and it's not to say that you're doing something wrong.
Yeah.
It's to say that you're giving your all to your loved one and you're forgetting yourself.
And maybe you're not alone in this situation.
Exactly. That as you're going through this, and it's extremely helpful to hear others and their stories and how they are managing, so that you're not the only one. You're not alone. Yeah. And if you can understand how someone else is able to get through them, then maybe you can use similar tactics in your own caregiving.
Right. So in this newfound role as a caregiver, can you give us maybe a funny anecdote that you've come across?
The struggles of day-to-day routine, the simple things. One of the first things that I really had to get a handle on is how a grown woman can take a water pick and turn it into a weapon. And making sure that I have safe distance before it's turned on. I say it's funny now, but part of this is because as she gets older, she's losing the muscle control. There's some muscle atrophy, and even the simple part of pressing the on and off button, and at the same time having to multitask. And for anyone else that would see this as, it's just a simple, I'm just brushing my teeth, or I'm just doing this one step. But for her, she actually has to concentrate to make sure the water pick is in her mouth before she presses on. Yeah. And before she removes it from her mouth, that she remembers to turn it off. And there's been a couple times I've been sprayed in the face, and we feel like the bathroom's going to need some remodeling.
Well, again, that's a very lighthearted example, and I'm sure there are just as many examples that are not so lighthearted.
Right. Right. There are the days that it's the mundane routine, and even if we make it through a day where there's no issues, no emotional outbreaks, and it's those few victories that we are sometimes are too far view in between, but it's those victories that we hang on day by day. But then you go to bed at night and the brain resets, and you have to have that same mundane routine the next day, and only hope that what worked yesterday, the positive reinforcements, the encouragement that kept the outbreaks at bay, worked again the next day. And sometimes they don't.
Good days and bad days.
Absolutely. Good days and bad days.
Wow.
And so the podcast is going to get further into that.
Awesome. So people can kind of come in and realize that there is help, there's support, and they're not in it by themselves. Because I can understand how when you're caring for someone in the home, you can feel very isolated.
Yes.
So maybe this is a way that they can feel, even if it's just a voice from their computer or their smartphone or their iPod, that there's someone there going through it with them who has found some ways that can possibly make it easier.
And in addition to that, I'm trying to make it to be a little bit more interactive, so that as people are able to subscribe, they can actually ask questions and tell me their stories. What are they facing? What are their issues? Where are they getting hung up and stuck? And so then I can respond in such a way that says, this is what worked for me, or, hey, we're all learning together. I can do the research, and here's what I found.
Okay, so now I'm going to go off script here. I'm going to put you on the spot real quick. I know there's a workbook and a workshop that you're also developing to kind of go along with this. Now, I know this may be a spoiler for some of the people, but can you tell us anything about that?
Yes, I will give you a little tidbit on that. So the book was one piece. The day-to-day was the other, now in the podcast. But the other part of it, I realized there's a missing gap in between. And that's where the educational piece comes in. Some people are willing to and able to attend support groups, but not everybody. And even the support groups that I've been able to attend, the people that I've met over the last 5 years, and the people coming in are coming in younger and younger every time. They're asking the same questions. The same information is needed. So this is where I pull together a curriculum that is more of an educational called Caregivers Trinity.
Okay. So it's very rooted in a faith-based kind of foundation, it sounds like. Because when you say Trinity, I immediately think of Father, Son. Coming from the soldierforchrist.net, personally, I immediately think of Father, Son, Holy Spirit when you say Trinity.
Right. And this actually came to me in a moment when I was meditating a year ago. And so it does have that connotation to it.
Okay.
The Trinity are the three areas that caregivers must know and live by.
Can you give us those three? Can you spoil that for us? Let's give the people that are listening to the inaugural podcast a little insight, a little exclusive gift here. What are the three pillars of the Caregivers Trinity?
Okay, so before I tell you those three pillars, let me just give you this little tidbit of information.
Okay.
And this is why the Caregiver Trinity is needed. Today, an estimated 5.7 million Americans are believed to have one of the four types of Alzheimer's disease. Another American is diagnosed with Alzheimer's every 68 seconds. When you add in persons with one of the other 47 identified forms of dementia, and I did just say 47,
Wow.
like Lewy body, vascular dementia, which has 5 different variations, frontal temporal dementia, which has 9 different types, Parkinson's dementia, Wernicke-Korsakoff's, which is an alcohol dementia, Huntington's, AIDS dementia, and it goes on.
Wow.
The total number of Americans in some stage of dementia is closer to 10 to 11 million. That's a new case of dementia every 36 seconds. So when you think about that, or at least when I did, the Caregiver Trinity came about because the common themes that are involved in this: spirituality, lifestyle, and financial stability.
Okay. Yeah.
We launch a boomerang that comes back to us later in life when we don't follow these three. And so that's where caregiver.
There you have it. And I want to ask one more question. Now we're coming up on our time here. I want to ask one more question. Go back. You mentioned support groups. A lot of times people hear support groups. Oh, I don't need that. I'm not going to go there. There's a certain taboo for some reason that can be attached to support groups. How important is that when it comes to being a caregiver and understanding these types of illnesses?
It's extremely important. I did the same in the beginning because pride is... It's a dangerous way to dangerous mindset.
Yeah.
For me, I didn't want the help. I didn't want to accept the reality of everything, and I was afraid that if I accepted the reality that this would become my story. But in hindsight, the support is there so that you can improve upon your story. And so we do need to avoid looking at support groups as kind of the same way people look at therapy. Mom came from a family time background that therapy was not viewed as something positive. And so some people will automatically say they don't have time for support groups. They won't give me what I need, because one of the automatic responses to dealing with this as a caregiver, stepping into a caregiver, is that you automatically isolate yourself, because some of these day-to-day challenges make you feel alone, that no one else understands what you're going through. No one else is going through what you are going through. And so we do it to ourselves. We pull away. Yeah,
there's a certain level of maybe a feeling of inadequacy that people may have. And so
absolutely. Because no one's gone to nursing school, and that's what this has come down to. Is it's almost like we all need a small course in nursing.
Well, and I'm sure there's a certain aspect of that too. And I want to plug one of your recent blog posts was "It's Okay to Feel Inadequate." I would encourage those of you listening to go check that out. There's a very inspirational video that goes along with it. It kind of shows you that we all have those moments in life, but that's okay, that there is a foundation there for us. And I think that support groups are a big deal when it comes to that, to overcoming those feelings and to understand that you are not alone, that there are those going through identical or similar cases and instances and experiences in life that are caring for their own loved ones. So yeah, I would encourage you listening, don't be afraid to join a local support group when it comes to this. You will need that support going forward. We're right at time here, Jessica. I want to thank you for letting me be here today to introduce the podcast and the website, jessicalizelcannon.com, and the book that's coming out later this year, targeted later this year, Proactive Caregiving, A Guide to Becoming a Healthier Caregiver, which really is focusing on you as the caregiver and not so much the person receiving the care. Because if you can't take care of yourself, you can't take care of your loved one.
Exactly.
Jessica, thank you very much for letting us be here today. I appreciate your time.
I've enjoyed it.
To learn more about proactive caregiving and to hear other episodes of this podcast, please go to www.jessicalizelcannon.com. That's www.jessicalizelcannon.com. This podcast is produced by Cannon Light Media LLC. www.cannonlightmedia.com. Music provided by Chris Paradise.
Membership fees apply after free trial. Cancel anytime.
Real fitness isn't just how you look, it's how you feel. If you want to get stronger and healthier, and most importantly, feel good, then make yourself your number one priority. Make yourself Job 1. I'm Jennifer Jacobs with Beachbody, and my Job 1 program isn't like anything else you've tried. Job 1 is easy, effective, and for everyone. 20 minutes a day, 5 days a week, allowing you to put yourself first so you can be your best for others. Just go to beachbody.com, and you can try Job 1 today for free.